drugs, guns, and money.
Let us transition, Mike, to the big story of today on Wednesday, again, December 16th. Supreme Court of the United States, for the first time, Mike, in 3 decades, is addressing the law of college sports. So this is a very, very big deal. I don't think people may have understood this. You know, we talk about whether issues will go up to the Supreme Court a lot. And in law school, you know, whoever takes con law, there we talk all about cases that reach the Supreme Court. But it's a micro fraction of cases that make it to that level. A lot of cases can ask, but they don't always get there. So the Supreme Court today announced that they're going to hear the appeal on the Alston case. And just so people kind of understand, and then Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you because I know you know way more about this case than the average bear. We'll get into it, but essentially the NCAA lost at the lower court level, and they're bringing up an appeal, and they're basically trying to say what they're doing in terms of placing these limits on college athletes is not violative of antitrust law. So they don't have an antitrust exemption like Major League Baseball does. So we really have to dig into the antitrust law here. So Mike, why don't you give us a brief background on the Alston case and where it was left at the intermediary level that the Supreme Court is now going to weigh in?
Yeah, so where it was left off was the Ninth Circuit. And for college athletes, the Ninth Circuit is, and for attorneys, for the legal sphere, the Ninth Circuit in California, well, it doesn't just house California, but mainly coming out of California, that's where you want to be. If you want to win an NCAA case, you go to the Ninth Circuit because Judge Wilkin will hear it in California, and you'll probably win because that's exactly what happened with O'Bannon, and that happened with Alston. Judge Wilkin, I would say, not to go too far, as she's an advocate for NCAA athletes, but if you read her opinions, you can see that the NCAA is just doesn't make any sense. So Dan was right. I read, it was a 104-page case that came out of the Ninth Circuit. I believe it was last spring, 2019. So, and basically what it was a number of NCAA men's and women's basketball players, as well as FBS football student athletes, and they were challenging the NCAA rules that limit compensation that they can receive in exchange for athletics. So that's the whole name, image, and likeness. It fit right into the sphere. O'Bannon was a little bit different because that was EA Sports and the video games. That was that case. So Alston was the student athletes. They were arguing that the limits violate federal antitrust law because, student athletes could get greater compensation in exchange for their athletic services, comparing themselves to pro athletes or whatnot. Basically, I think the biggest takeaway that I had from this case was Judge Wilkin was attacking the definitions that the NCAA was using, which I'm making a hand motion because it was they used circular definitions, is basically what she said. The NCAA is hiding behind this amateurism reasoning for not compensating student athletes, saying that because they're amateurs, they're not allowed to be paid, and then they define amateurs as student athletes who don't get paid. So what type of definition, how can you go on that reasoning alone just doesn't make any sense. And Judge Wilkin took big issue with that reasoning, saying that you can't hide behind these circular definitions forever, and that a student athlete being paid makes them not an amateur, which makes them not eligible. She didn't understand their reasoning, and rightfully so. And that's really where she hit home with, and why Alston ruled the same way. But with let
me jump in really quick. So I think, again, so for the people that maybe aren't maybe 1Ls or that aren't really lawyers, Mike's referring to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So this case was at the trial court level. Then it got to the intermediary level. So the Supreme Court didn't have to, by any means, accept the case on appeal. The case could have ended there. And if it did, then maybe today would have been an even interesting day because they'd be held in violation of antitrust law as of today. But I think with the case of this magnitude, I think with all the federal attention that's being now paid to this issue of name, image, and likeness, I think where this reaches a very strong newsworthy level on the sports law landscape. We've spent, I don't know, maybe over a year at this point since California Fair Pay to Play came into play. I didn't even mean that, but whatever. No pun intended. But back in November of 2019, California said they wanted to pay student athletes, and then Florida passed their own laws, and so on and so forth. So people have been asking for this. NCAA has been asking for antitrust exemption. States are passing this different legislation across the country. The NCAA is kind of trying up with their own payment bylaws. But at the end of the day, if the NCAA is violating antitrust law by even their current limits on student athletes, I don't even know if we need to jump through all these hoops, right? Like, I just don't think the NCAA is allowed to do what they're doing, even absent state law. I mean, is that how you view it, Mike?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like what was happening was they were just trying to put as much pressure on the NCAA as possible to finally just amend their bylaws to have it effectuate payment for athletes. And they weren't saying necessarily like, because you're playing athletics for our team, you get paid. It's just these other opportunities that arise. Like I think there is a new lawsuit coming out where these two student athletes have a big following on Instagram, and advertisers want to pay them, but they can't get paid because that is in violation of the NCAA rules. So I definitely agree that there's just all of this pressure coming from a lot of different angles. Alston came down in the Ninth Circuit, the Court of Appeals, and that was one angle of pressure, and then it was being lifted on appeal. And then you had SB, 206 coming out of California that put even more pressure on the NCAA, because that actually put a timestamp being like, okay, this has to happen by, I think it was January of 2021. So it's like, this is going to happen. Then Florida was like, well, we want to be first. And then there was the fight between different state legislatures because of the, recruitment advantage, right?
Yeah. So the one correction, California was 2023. Which was why,
sorry.
Yeah, no, but it's the moot point, because now California is trying to move up to 2021. So the date's not coming out of nowhere. So yeah, it's an interesting level. And I think, Mike, where this all kind of makes sense, we can all tie this together. And you phrased it really appropriately. They're putting all this immense pressure on the NCAA, and for better or for worse, I think we were all operating in a gray zone, right? Like, what really is preventing the NCAA from paying their athletes? Well, the NCAA says they shouldn't, and they say it's violative of antitrust law. It's because NCAA is a private business at a certain level, but obviously they're run by state institutions. So what rules, right? Should the NCAA's rules take over, or should state laws take over? So that's why it's imperative that the states were kind of forcing the issue. Now the Supreme Court's forcing the issue. So they're really getting it from all levels of government. I mean, the only branch of government remaining is the president to weigh in. And Donald Trump was basically there when he was trying to force college athletes back. So I think it's an interesting, really interesting look. I mean, I think you and I would be we'd be remiss if we made some type of prediction, but I think we probably should. I mean, I just think, Mike, when we see a case like this go to the Supreme Court, there's been so much talk about whether athletes should get paid. And if you just read the poll of the room, you read the poll, the pulse of the country, it's one of these topics like we saw in California. That's a bipartisan issue. Republicans, Democrats, they believe that athletes should get paid. I don't think you'll find anybody in this country that'll just say college athletes should not make a dime. Maybe some people will disagree as to the extent. Like, I believe it should be a true free market economy. I have no reason. Like, if my daughter Dylan became like Mrs. Connecticut basketball and got recruited to UConn, like, well, why can't she make $1 million a year? Like, I don't know why that would be an issue. But the thing that the NCAA has always rested their the laurels on, or their justification on, they want college athletes to be treated differently than pro sport athletes. And I guess I kind of understand that, right? Because you don't want kids to grow up so fast, but then it's almost a farce at a certain point, Mike, because we have players like, the late great Kobe Bryant, Kevin Garnett, LeBron James, who went straight from the high school to the pros, and they're fine, right? Like, they were healthy with their funds. They made a lot of money. Even best case scenario for just the world that we live in, a lot of guys are one and done players. They play 1 year in college and then they go to the pro. So what is the NCAA really protecting with their high level athletes? Yeah, I don't really see the justification for that anymore. In the world that we live in, athletes are growing up so fast. They're already on social media. They're already kind of thrown to the wolves of the media and whatnot. It's not a world where I think we need to really protect our athletes. And I think that's, what at least I've been trying to harp on. That's essentially player empowerment making its way to college. If these guys want to make money and they can make money, and like Tim Tebow, not the best example because he's not really in favor of this, but he probably could have garnered $10 million a year. I think maybe I'm being conservative, in the state of Florida when he was, the god of Gainesville. By the way, we've said God now 3 times on this podcast. This is almost like when Dan was saying Damien over and over on that random.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Mike, I guess I'll pass it to you. What do you think of your predictions here, where this thing could go?
Since I got to law school, so 3 years ago, I've been saying when the name, image, likeness stuff started coming about, athletes were eventually going to get paid. It was going to happen. And it was just which way. The only question was which way it was going to occur. And that's what we're talking about. The different angles that's coming out. Because then the NCAA said, okay, we can fight back. And they tried to make a federal bill. They got on Congress's side to write a bill, so they could take the control over, because if there was a federal bill,
federal government, Supreme Court, it's literally almost every I shouldn't post this podcast, even though we're allowed to, but almost every way that they're getting hit from this.
Right, exactly. And the reason that the NCAA went to Congress, because if they passed a bill, then that poo-pooed all of the state governments, whatever the state passed, because then that would be precedent. They would have to adhere to the federal bill. So, and you want to talk about Tim Tebow, you can go through the number of athletes that kind of went through. The first person I thought of was Jimmer. Think about how much money Jimmer could have made going out of BYU. And the thing about, you talk about players going directly into the pros, that just doesn't happen. I mean, it could have happened for Zion, but there's these rules in place that the NCAA and I think pro sports kind of work together, being like to make this one and done rule. For football, there's I think a 3-year rule. You have to be in college for 3 years, right? Before you can
3 years
go into
moved from high school, not necessarily, because you could be a sophomore redshirt player.
Oh, right. So the NCAA is acting as a minor league system for a lot of pro sports. Baseball is different because baseball actually has minor leagues. So why not go get 4 years education and then go into the minors? Because you're going to have to do that anyways. That was the whole Billy Bean issue. If you've ever seen Moneyball, going to college.
Have I ever seen Moneyball, Mike? Come on.
So
I was like live tweeting Moneyball like a few months ago, but go ahead.
So I mean, to me, this also hurts. It doesn't hurt pro sports, but it kind of, because I think you think about the NBA, they don't really have like the development league anymore, the G League. Like you have what LaMelo did, where he went to Europe, and then that's how he got his experience. But that's only because he had a shoe because of his dad, and he was violating NCAA rules, and he couldn't play in college anymore. So it all kind of circles around these arbitrary NCAA rules, because they think, what they say goes, which fair. If you want to play college sports, you have to abide by the rules, whatever. But this is just an issue where it's always been kind of in the back of everyone's mind, where it's like, college athletes are going to get paid. It's going to happen. And yeah, I think we're getting very close there, and just the pressure is building up now, and it's just going to happen. Okay.
So the only thing, Mike, I'll push back and we'll move to the next one. I think there's a world which not enough people are talking about. If you were to pay college athletes, say $1 million a year, however you're going to do it, Mr. One and Done might feel inclined to stay in college for 4 years, right? Like, let him get paid. So there's the scenario where you can have a better quality feeder system to the pros. So I think we don't have an incentive for college basketball players to stay 4 years. I guess college football players are more likely to stay to the senior, but we don't see it that often. So in any event, I just don't think we can assume that the players are going to leave for greener pastures quickly. Is always my only point there.
Maybe better. I can agree with that with Frank Kaminsky, because Frank Kaminsky actually played all 4 years, and then he went in and he was decent, but now he's not great in the NBA. But if you had Zion stay all 4 years at Duke, I think that hurts the NBA. They make way more money with Zion in the league than out of the league.
I don't know. I don't know, because I mean, we'll have this conversation offline. But I just think it's I mean, let's put it this way. there were years where guys would stay 4 years, like Tim Duncan, right? Or like he was a polished player when he came to the pros. He could dominate immediately. So I think the game, I mean, maybe we're somewhere in the middle, because you could be Trae Young and come into the pros and be fine, because the college game is now, just with shooting, is getting close to the pros. But you have so many players flame out at the back of the first round that come out early and aren't prepared for I guess the money aspects, and they just kind of fall off. So I mean, I have no issue with it.